Today we're looking at Psalms 51. This psalm tends to lean more towards what David did with Bathsheba and later on with the murder of Uriah. It's interesting that as bad as we all think we are, here was the apple of God's eye that not only had an adulterous relationship, but participated in actually murdering one of his friends. Now he knew who Uriah was. Uriah was one of his 30 mighty men. He knew who this guy was, and he knew what he was doing when he set up the situation to take the man to his death. And then God called him on the carpet of it. Sometimes I think when I think that, I've done things that can't be forgiven, well, look at David. But he begins to have mercy upon me according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitudes. He's just pouring himself out here. And he was in the wrong, and he was right to pour himself out. God did forgive him. His name is still said good, except for this instance. Well, there's a guy I was watching who was talking about how David's life took a downhill turn. He was really going good till he did this. And then after this, he had trouble with his family. He lost his son. He lost his kingdom for a period of time. Things just went terrible for him at this one point. But he's going after, wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity and cleanse me. He's not placing blame. He's saying, here's what I did. Cleanse me of this. Cleanse me of my sin. I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee alone have I sinned. This isn't a sociological sin. This isn't a sin against nature or a sin against our own morality. This is a sin against God himself. And he sees that. And he says, if in thy sights thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be cleared when thou judgest. So this is a way for you to be clear when you're judging. So he's throwing himself through it. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts and in the hidden parts. He wants truth inward and outward. When we're telling the truth, there are scriptures later on that he judges the reins of your heart. He just doesn't judge what you do. He judges what you would do if you were in a certain situation. Some men are only not having adulterous affairs because they're not in a situation where they could. Some men are not thieves only because they're not in a place where they could get away with it. So again, God judges our hearts, not just our actions. Out of the abundance of the heart, a man speaks. So he's created me a clean house, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. And this is another part of a Keith Green song, which I grew up listening to. But it's interesting that he takes this not from a psalm of worship, but a psalm of abject sin and failure. Creating me a new heart. I've had an old heart. I've been a sinner. I've been involved with transgressions. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm taking responsibility, but I can't fix this. I need you to have mercy. And didn't have to have mercy. He could have said, no, you're on your own. I'm sorry, I'm done. I'll pick another person around you and build the kingdom. Or I'll just wait and do it with a son. You'll have a son. He could have made up any number of scenarios. But he did forgive David. Restore to me the joy of thy salvation. The communion I had with you is what I've lost. When we participate in sin, we lose that koinonia. We lose that communion. Deliver me from blood guiltiness. Here is the one that tells him he was blood guilty. Once again, when we're looking at the Bible from an evidentiary point of view, there'll be one or two words, and usually little words, or one word rightly put, which will tell the tale. Had he not put blood guiltiness in here, we might have thought, well, this was an average sin or some kind of problem that had gone up. But he's being specific here. O Lord, open thou my lips that I might show forth praise, for thou desirest not sacrifice. But if thou desirest not in burnt offerings, but the sacrifices of a God or a broken and a contrite heart, O God, thou shalt not despise. He will not despise. The meanings when we look into Leviticus, and it's interesting, we see that parallel here. He mentions the sacrifices as we're studying the sacrifices. That it's not, God didn't set this up so that I might be worshipped. He set this up so that we might have koinonia, that we might have communion. But anytime a created person is with a holy God, there will be worship. You cannot not worship. So he's setting up the type of worship he demands. And this worship is where men see the blood guiltiness of sin. They're having to constantly slay bulls, constantly slay lambs, constantly kill turtle doves. They're constantly dealing with cleanliness issues as we've been looking at in Leviticus. But that wasn't the point. The point of God and the point of the Old Testament was not to create a system, but by the system you might see Messiah and step away from the system. So he talks about this. And thou shalt be pleased with the sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offerings and whole offerings. Then shall they offer bullocks upon thy altar. When you come to the altar and you do the offering and you've had a contrite and a broken heart, the offering means more. The offering is what it was supposed to intend. So read 51. There's a lot of power here. Looking at the chapter 13 and 14 in Leviticus, we deal with a lot of medical information. And it's interesting, like I'd stated before, that God sets up this nation. They're coming from zero. They have no laws. All they know is the slavery. All they've known is other people have been governing them. And here, they're going to be governing themselves, but actually God is going to be governing them. He's setting up, like we've said before, he set up the Ark of the Covenant first, then came the tabernacle, then the courtyard, the priest and all of their epochs and all of their garments. Then with consecration, the careful consecration of the priest and making sure that they were sequestered for 7 days. Then we started looking at different ways that you're supposed to live. We look at dietary laws. We're going from dietary laws now to health practices. Once again, we're doing medical. Like I'd said before, this is also going to cover economics. It's going to cover almost everything they do so that they might live righteously and justly within the confines that God has for them, that they could be the people of God. And it's very interesting. When you're looking at these plagues, you're looking at different things. These are not the same plagues that, the word plague is a base word. It's like saying vehicle. On the freeway, you're going to have a different amount of vehicles. Here, you're dealing with, a plague could be many different things. And to get specific here, I'm going to mention what I think some of these might be, but again, going back 3,500 years, this could be very basic diseases that later on would mutate and grow and become different diseases that we've dealt with in the last couple of hundred years. So we talk about that. He begins talking about these plagues. He talks about leprosy. It's very possible that you're going to move into an area where, because of the sin of the people, there's going to be leprosy. Leprosy seems like it's a bacterial infection or a viral infection that you'll get because of how these people have lived, about how they've done. You'll see, we'll be later on talking about housing. They've talked about, talking about garments, that you have garments that have these things on them. Again, the tie of disease with sin is very important here, with sinful lifestyle. And again, many of these were trespass sins. Didn't wash your hands, didn't keep clean. You had animals and kids and all kinds of matter and stuff just floating around and touching faces and cleaning and not being as clean, I should say, but not having any laws. God was creating this also that he might love the Canaanites, that he might actually love the Jebusites and the Hittites and all of these. Just come to Zion, come to Jerusalem, learn from this God, and then farm that back to your area. But sin always resists righteousness. So we're going to go into this not too much, because not too in depth. I'll leave that for you. It's a very good read. Again, it's highly medical, that God cares enough to care about your health. He's describing the leprosy, the spots, how they would look with the different kinds of hair, and what you're supposed to do. We begin triage, we begin quarantine, we begin hospitalization and care. They're put away for 7 days, and it isn't that they're taken away and put into a cave for 7 days and no one takes care of them. The priest will be taking care of them. Maybe family members will bring them meals and meet with them carefully, sequestered away, maybe pushing food or water or drink to them. They're still cared for. They're not sitting, sometimes our hospitals are places of loneliness where people stay in a bed and they never see their family. And they only see nurses that are really harrowed, really busy, and so they don't get the proper mental care that they need. These people would be cared for, and the priest would be cared for, and they watched in on them. And after 7 days, they looked at them again. They looked to see if it had gotten better or worse. And if they see it's gotten worse, they do other things. If they see it's gotten better, if it becomes rawness in the flesh, a lot of time we get the idea that God has created these bodies that will heal themselves. We have to realize that topical analgesics, that creams, Band-Aids, that some of the things that we do, the medicines we take, are actually just helping the body help itself. Your body will heal itself. Your body will send out antibodies. Your body will send out, will start clotting. Your body will want to move, phlegm out of your lungs for respiration. It'll want to take down a fever. Medicines are only helping a healthy body make itself healthy. And we're looking at it if it became a boil, and we're going down here and seeing, and the priest will look in on it. The priest is running this show. And what they do is they look for a way, and if it looks like it's going to pass on, it's going to move out, then they have certain things that they do there for cleanliness before God. Once again, you've got physical cleanliness. You have to have spiritual cleanliness also because of the uncleanness that was in your body, the pus, the sores, and different. I won't go too deeply into how dirty it can be, how it needs to be taken care of. And before God, it was caused by sin. Sin causes disease and viruses. When we go where we shouldn't be and we get viruses, that was our choice. When we do things we shouldn't do, and diseases are passed on generation to generation, they get into the genome, then they pop up. There's a scripture that I was saying, bearing the iniquity. Even though I didn't do it, I may have to bear the iniquity. I have to bear the uncleanliness that happens because of something in my body that was placed there generations ago because of the sin of forefathers. But it's made me unclean. I have to deal with my uncleanliness even if it wasn't a direct causality of my actions. We're still unclean before God. But he has provided ways for us to be clean. People get all wrapped up in, well, I don't want to get clean before God. Well, do it anyway. Get clean before God, even if you didn't do it directly. But indirectly, yes. As we just saw with David in 51, I was born into sin. I was born in an area of sin. There is sin in my genome because of, the genetics of my ancestors. I was born into sin. I've got sin in my makeup. I've got sin that makes me unclean and sin that affects my brain. Many of the sinfulness that we get into with our minds and our lifestyles and our choices, are they tied to decisions that were made by our, are we a part of the genetic predisposition, I'll say, to sin? Yeah, we come from Adam. But he talks about inflammation. He talks about if you have a plague on your beard or on your skin and you're supposed to shave off all the hair and you'll go 7 days, then once again, if you're clean, they'll shave off all the hair again, and this is the entire body. And again, that makes sense because of disease in the follicles, the disease that's in the hair. So this is pretty smart, that God would understand that now that the disease was in you, but you've been sequestered, you've eaten good food, you've got good water, you've got some care, and now you're cleaning this out of your system. Well, you need to now shave off the hair and start over. They even shaved off the eyebrows and top to bottom. You can imagine the nicks and cuts that people might get as you're trying to shave legs and the backs and chest and arms and different things. You have to shave all of this off. And sometimes I think some of these represent shingles. I was looking in here that was talking about a bright spot. It talks about where, different things. I'm just wondering if it was an ancestor of our chicken pox. There's one of them that talks about being red. I wonder if that's an ancestor to measles. I mean, these things have mutated. We haven't been studying diseases long enough to see what they were in other forms. We're also dealing, so is it possible that many of these are connected and leprosy is just a base? Now, there are people who have true leprosy in here and they are out of the community. And so that's a big problem there. Many times it may not even be their fault, but remember, these people that seem to be castaways by people who misread this and saw them as castaway people were the ones that Jesus ate with, were the ones that Jesus came to, were the ones that Jesus touched. So we have to realize that we're not called to throw people away, because Jesus went to the people who were sinners, who were thieves, who were prostitutes, who were lepers. So let's be careful that we're not sequestering people today. Just because this person was outside of the camp doesn't mean they couldn't be cared for by the people of the camp. Doesn't mean also that they couldn't participate directly with the shedding blood of lambs, but indirectly the priest could go and shed blood for him. The priest was his representative before God. When the high priest stood for once a year for the entire nation, if this person was in Simeon or Issachar or Zebulun, they would be represented by the by the gems that were on the ephod. Remember that? He is still represented even though he can't be there because of his sin. And that's a wonderful thing, that God has provided a way for us to be represented in the high priest Jesus when sometimes we are sequestered by our sin. So let's not throw people away here. And we're talking about and there is a part here at the end of, or in the middle of 13 where it says that if this has gotten bad, he has to put a covering on his lip and cry, unclean, unclean. We've seen that in some of the movies and things. We're talking about leprosy in your garments. Again, you have garments, but also they go in and there's garments in the households. When they come to Jericho and take Jericho, you're taking other people's stuff. It's already been provided. And, you go and take the stuff, but some of it may have plague. You may have brought some small amounts of plague with you when you plundered the Egyptians. Once again, same thing. These people did not own things of their own accord. They didn't walk out with stuff from their own houses. They probably owned very little because they were slaves. And when they were given this amount of clothing and amount of material, amount of gold and silver and different things, materials and whatnot, they would have, some of it may have plague on it. What we call mildew, mold, these different things. And some of them might actually be leprosy. So they're talking about taking the garment, treating it the same way, putting it away for 7 days, looking at the garment. If they can repair the garment, fine. If they can clean the garment and then watch it for another 7 days, that's fine. If not, it has to be burned and thrown outside of the camp. This is for any garment that's woolen or linen. You didn't mix the two. And so they could pronounce it clean or pronounce it unclean. In 14, we get more specific about dealing with leprosy, the lepers themselves. And they're talking specifically about taking, this is more the ceremonial. There's a ceremonial part of this also where you're going to take a turtle dove and kill the turtle dove and take the blood and sprinkle it. And it says that you take it and you'll dip it in the bird and you'll sprinkle it. And then after 7 days, they will go and you'll shave the hair off. There is first one what they did was medical. Now they're looking at ceremonial cleansing. The shedding of blood of something that was easy to find, like a turtle dove, like a pigeon. And this guy, even the family goes and finds the pigeon, whatever. You find a couple of pigeons, you bring them in there, you kill one, and you put the says here that you take the living bird with the hyssop and you dip the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed. So one bird is immersed. This is like baptizing, if you will, into the blood. And then you let it go. It's symbolizing the blood is paid for the sin that has caused this leprosy. It's very symbolic. And so, it shall be 7 days that you'll shave off his beard, of his heads and his eyebrows. And then on the 8th day, they'll take 2 lambs. Once again, ceremonially, the shedding of blood of the first year. And then they start making these sacrifices. And they're doing the sin sacrifice. They do the trespass sacrifice, which is very similar to the sin sacrifice. Once again, they're covering the fact that this trespass may have been innocent on this person's part, or it might be guilty on this person's part. So they do both to cover both the trespass of the person and the sin of maybe their ancestors. So we see ceremonial cleansing going on here before God that has to deal with shed blood of a lamb. And it's personal responsibility that the priest shall slay the lamb and kill the sin offering and the burnt offering in the holy place. The priest will then take the blood and put it on the tip of the right ear of the man, and the right hand, and the right toe. Once again, what the priest did for consecration, now you're doing to this man what you hear, where you see, where you go. Basically, saying that this is very well that this happened because of either you or your ancestors. The things you heard, you did that you shouldn't have done, things you did with your hands, you shouldn't have done, places you went with your feet that you shouldn't have gone. It doesn't matter. Jesus isn't here to point finger at sin in the sense of it's totally your fault. We live in sin. We were born in sin, like, again, the psalmist says. Our job is to take care of the fact that we are sinners, not argue with him on, well, what sin was mine and what I didn't do. This isn't a matter of a blame game. The blame is so spread out that there's no reason trying to even do that. So we see, again, this trespass, the sin offering. We see that they take the oil and they put it on, they anoint the man. This is very similar to baptism. and they pour it on his head. And then the priest shall offer the sin offering and make atonement for him, and he will be cleansed from the uncleanliness, and after they will kill the burnt offering. So they go to trespass offering, sin offering. Now we're doing a burnt offering to God. So we're doing the three offerings, and they're not the same. Remember, trespass, and I'm going to say this again, is for that misdemeanor. The sin offering is for the felony, and the burnt offering is just completely to God in thankfulness. It's probably got a part of a peace offering in there too. Thankfulness to God, completely 100% His. Actually, I don't see the peace offering in here. That's where I misspoke. The meat offering is not in here because the priest is not a part of this game. He didn't do it wrong. There's no part of him in this, so we're not seeing that. So we see those three offerings mentioned. He talks about if you have the poor and cannot get it, you'll take one lamb as a trespass offering to be waived. They'll do a waive offering. Again, these offerings are set up having to deal with circumstances. If you can afford it, you bring in the lamb. If you can't, they'll do a lamb and do a waive offering to God. Once again, that offering is like, I'm giving this to you and I'm taking it back, but it's to you. And all these offerings are to God. So if you can't afford to do the sin offering, you can also do the trespass offering in the form of a wave offering, where you bring 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons and do a burnt offering. Seems to be there's some leeway from going back and forth of these. Depends on the situation, so that there's cleansing, but there's also a ceremonial cleansing before God to recognize the sinfulness of the people, to recognize the sinfulness of actions, and to recognize our responsibility to be a part of this, the priest's responsibility, our responsibility to bring the sacrifice, his responsibility to deal with the sacrifice, and God accepts the sacrifice. This is participatory. It isn't just saying, well, God will take care of it when he's ready. No, there's a participating that needs to go on. When Jesus comes, he says, come to me, all you weak and heavy laden. He is the lamb. He is the lamb that will be slain, but you have to come. You have to come to the lamb. You have a part in this say. You have a part of this deal. That we're waiting for God to move in our hearts. Well, move in your own heart. And the priest will take the lamb as a trespass offering and a log of oil, and so wave it before the Lord. So this is for the very poor. We're waving it to the Lord. And he'll sprinkle on the right hand. So once again, they're dealing with the right ear, right hand, right foot of the poor person. And he'll shall offer one of the turtle doves, and they will make a burnt offering. And they'll make a meat offering, and the priest will make an atonement for him that is cleansed before the Lord. So there is a part of some of these where the meat offering is offered. I misspoke. Again, seeing how God has taken all 4 of these and kind of put them together so that there's participation and there is blood for sin, and there's ceremonial cleansing, and there's will cleansing. All of these are wrapped together. And it's very important to realize that God just doesn't want to heal us physically. He wants us to be ceremonial clean. And the blood of Christ makes us ceremonial clean before God. Then we're called to live a sanctified, consecrated life. So it's a little more complex than what we see in the scripture. So we have to be very careful when we're looking at this. Again, and now we're going to go talking about houses at the end of 14. It's a long chapter. But again, if there's been, you're going to get these houses. But if you find mold, mildew, if you find leprosy, you're to dig out that part of the wall. You're supposed to cleanse. You scrub it down, and you take the shavings and you cast it out. You cast the bricks and the shavings out of the camp into the place of refuge called Gehenna, and later called Gehenna. And you will take it there, and then you'll rebuild. You'll watch it for a few days. You'll rebuild, you'll watch it, see if it comes back. If it does, you got to do it again. If it gets really bad, you got to tear the whole thing down. We're just not talking about a cave. We're talking about a house. Remember, we talked about the making of the tabernacle. And many of these houses would look like that too, with beams going across and maybe different archways and things, but marble or stones going down and creating different rooms and things. But you're going to have to tear that down and start over. So he goes through this. He does talk about ceremonial cleansing. If you make it clean, you have to find the 2 birds again. You deal with the house just like you would the person. Taking the two turtle doves, 2 pigeons. You kill one, you take the other and dip it into the blood of the one. This is done with cedar and with hyssop and with scarlet. And one is dead and the other one you cast free. Again, ceremonial cleansing. It's very important that we get clean before God, and it's very important that we see that blood is always a part of the cleansing from sin before God. Thank you.